Hello and welcome. I think it's time we started this session, which is Publishing in Academic Journals, a Beginner's Guide. And if any of you at any point can't hear me, just give me a wave and I'll assume that's why. So first of all, I want to say my name is Jessica Davis. I'm a commissioning editor with Wiley. My colleagues are here today are editors in editorial office from the BERA journals, and they'll introduce themselves and their journals a bit more fully later on. And the format of the session is that I will give a short talk on publishing in academic journals and some of our recommendations. They will talk about their journals a little bit, and then there'll be opportunity for any questions and comments you might have. So let's start with that. Let's start with moving the pointer along. That would help, wouldn't it? So I'm assuming the fact you're all here means that you already know that you want to publish in an academic journal. But to start, we kind of wanted to start with the reasons why you might wish to do so. Firstly is registration, of course. Publishing in an academic journal lets you establish all that, all important, this is what I did, this is my research, and even better, this is what I did, and I did this first. Secondly, certification. A peer-reviewed journal means that the articles published within its covers, whether those are real print covers, as we say, or metaphorical online covers, are given the quality stamp of approval by reviewers. Dissemination. In an online license world, publishing in a journal means that thousands of libraries and hundreds of thousands of readers will have access and be able to read your content. And archiving. Publishing in a journal gives a guarantee of preservation and your version of record being kept for posterity. And finally, improvement. We all know that publishing articles in journals is helpful for the career of an academic. So given that you want to publish in an academic journal, how do you know which one? Where do you start? You've decided to publish in an education journal, but there are hundreds out there. How do you start to choose? A good place to start is the subject coverage. You may wish to target a specialist journal that covers your particular niche within educational research, and because that might have the audience, the specific audience you're looking to target. Or you may wish to reach beyond your immediate field boundaries and look at a more generalist journal where you can expect that more people lay their eyes on the text. Nextly, prestige. Think of your wish list of journals. What would be your top 3 for this particular article? Impact factor is regularly used as a proxy for quality, but try not to ignore all the other measures of quality that we have, such as downloads, the history of the journal, the current content that it's publishing, and the association as well. The link between society and a journal and a publisher and a journal can speak volumes in terms of the quality of that title. Likewise, some journals advertise and you can ask them for approximate turnaround times and acceptance rates. Most journals work hard to keep their turnaround times as short as possible whilst maintaining a solid and quality peer review. But there is a big discrepancy in the acceptance rates of a journal and to some extent the turnaround times as well. If, for example, you're being judged on impact factor, then it makes sense to target the 3 journals that have the highest impact factor in your field where you think you'll be accepted. If, however, it's more important to you to get your content out within a year, you may wish to look at a journal that has a shorter turnaround time and a relatively high acceptance rate. It's all about that targeting of journals. And types and lengths of articles. We regularly hear that people haven't chosen to submit to a journal where their article fits, and looking at the type and length of articles previously published can help you ascertain that. And finally, open access options. We'll talk a little bit about open access later, but many people think they want to publish open access, so they have to go to a pure open access journal, and that's not the case. The majority of journals will allow you to publish open access within subscription journals. So what do editors want in an article? The editors will obviously talk a bit more specifically about what they want from an article and what their journal is looking for. But generally speaking, there are some commonalities, and I think we can pull them out as follows. Firstly, we mentioned before, there's a good match to the journal scope, that it's a standalone, original piece of work, and that it's self-sufficient in itself. That it's a substantive contribution and it's a new interventional argument. That there's clarity within the approach, the method, and the data sources. And of course, the all-important referencing, that existing literature is taken into account and referenced well. So when you're writing the article, don't forget, author guidelines. It sounds like such an obvious one, but if I had £1 for every time someone ignored them, then I'd be a very rich woman. The journal style and the article types are clearly listed within the author guidelines. Journals spend a lot of time honing their author guidelines to really spell out to potential authors what they're looking for, including word limits, telling how to submit figures, tables, and images, which do vary from journal to journal. And the all-important as well, making sure that if you want to include images, you have the appropriate copyright permissions and licensing information to do so. And the abstract. The theme of the abstract can best be summarized by what is the article about, and it's important to remember that it's the most widely read part of your article. Anyone can access the abstract, whether they have access to the journal or not. And more important, as people search for articles using Google and Google Scholar and other search engines, are the keywords. Make sure that your keywords are well established, and check as well. It's an easy check to do. Type in your keywords, and what articles do you find? Do you find articles that look like your article, that are the kind of articles you'd expect to find, or are there keywords that find content better that would suit your text? So a word on ethics. We mentioned copyright and licensing for images, but it can be confusing within publishing a journal, and we're very aware of that. We wrote a peer-reviewed guide in itself called A Publisher's Perspective in 2006, and we've just done the second edition, which is free to download online, and we've been assured is really helpful in the guide in terms of that. But again, the key takeaways from that, just pulled a few out, are only submit to one journal at a time, publish in one place, so if you want to publish several articles based on the same research, that's acceptable, but each must make a different, unique contribution. Acknowledge all those that have contributed to the work, and cite thoroughly and accurately. So here we have a simplified version of the peer review process. Really what this illustrates is the fact that there may be an initial triage of papers where where editors check that their submissions are matching the scope and are approximately suitable before they send out for review. And it's really that section that hopefully this presentation will help you sort of avoid being rejected. The more research the more aware you can be of the journal in advance of submitting what they're looking for, the less likely you are to fall foul of that and be in that stage. And then it flows through obviously to the two reviewers. It may be that a third is required if the opinions are split, or post-revision it may be that it goes to another reviewer, and then ultimately end up with a decision. And the types of peer review process we have available, by far the most common of these will be double-blind peer reviews, where the author doesn't know who reviews their paper and the reviewers don't know who the author of the paper is. But increasingly we're seeing or hearing talk of open peer review, at which anyone can see comments on the peer review and contribute themselves, and post-publication peer review, which is kind of similar to a comments on a newspaper article, where the article has been published and changes will not be made because of the comments necessarily, but there's a peer review of sorts underneath the text. So then to types of decision. They vary by journal, but the general broad stroke are accept, and please don't be disheartened if accept isn't the answer you get. It's so rare that a pure accept is given. Generally, we see minor revisions, major revisions, which can also be called conditional accept. In other words, if you make these changes, you will have a place in this journal. And reject and resubmit, which not all hope is lost, and reject, which is that your paper does not fit this journal. So some survival tips. Do seek anything you can do to make your paper readier to submit in advance. For example, if English isn't your first language, get it checked. Even if it is, perhaps get it checked by a friend or a colleague. And similarly with the statistics. Reviewers will look at your statistics within a paper, but they might not be able to look into the detail that you can and someone else can in advance. Accept feedback as a learning experience, which I'm sure is easier said than done, but it's important to realize that they're trying to help your paper be the best that it can be. Persistence pays. Answer questions and make revisions in a clear and timely fashion. Again, we hear stories of people submitting to a journal and being told, oh, just make this change, and they never resubmit that paper. That paper, even though it's a small change that was recommended, never returns to them, and that's a real loss. Where does that paper go? Probably didn't go anywhere else, probably didn't get published, and it could have been easily with a couple of changes. And as you have done here, meet the editor sessions, seek out editors at conferences and take the opportunity to talk to them about your paper and check whether it fits within the scope. And once again, read and heed the author guidelines so that you don't get declined for an easy fix. So here we have a little map of the production process. The one thing that this leaves out, and what most publishers do now, is what we call at Wiley early view, but otherwise other publishers call things like online first or accepted article. And what that means is that as soon as your article is ready and has been copy edited and typeset, it goes online. It doesn't have to wait for an issue to come up, which obviously benefits you in that it's available online sooner with a DOI, that people can read your work and cite your work, and you're not waiting for the next space. And that comes just as soon as the article is ready. And search engine optimization, I'm not understating it when I say that it's an important and growingly important issue. If you look at the stats of how people access academic content, increasingly it is via search engines and it is searching through keywords. And if you publish with a journal like the journals here or with a major publisher, then you can rest assured that they are working to make their site and all the journals within their site as discoverable as possible. But there are things you can do to make your article as discoverable as possible likewise. And those include making sure that the title and abstract contain your keywords that tell the search engine what the article is about. Again, it's very tempting to put a lot of interesting keywords and a bit tangential sometimes, but actually just get to the core of what people will be searching for and what you want to be found on. And make sure your keywords are repeated. So they should be in your title, they should be in your abstract, and they should be in your text. And that kind of consistency and matching will allow the article to be as high in the rankings as possible. And consider a descriptive title, because they always work. Consider how readers search. Encourage links. So this is another part of the algorithm. It takes into account the number of quality links to an article, and how they measure that is, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but essentially the more trusted and quality links that lead to your article, the more valuable and trusted your article will be, and so again, the higher up in the rankings it will be. And don't sacrifice readability. Write for humans, and make sure it's as easy to read as it can be. So we've heard a lot about open access, and it's a relatively new, I think the debate's been going on for a much longer time, but it's really come to the surface in the last couple of years. So what is open access content? Digital content which can be accessed without payment by readers globally, and I would add to that it's in perpetuity, so for as long as it exists and it's the version of record and it's free to access. It's now accepted and growing part of publishing, often mandated by institutions and funders, particularly in the UK, where we've seen a big move towards gold last year, whereas in other regions it's sort of looking more at green, and I'll define those in a second. And there's hybrid journals, which are subscription journals that take open access articles, and there are born open access journals, which mean only open access articles will be accepted. But don't assume that you cannot publish your open access article in a subscription journal, because the majority do. So the definitions of open access. Instead, we have gold, which is the one mandated in the UK, in which the funder or the author pays an article publication charge and the article is made available immediately on publication on the publisher's website. And green is more about the self-archiving, and there's an embargo period, and it will be within an institutional or a central repository with no charge. So we have a dedicated site for this, wileyopenaccess.com, because there's a lot of information. So that's, if you want to know more about open access, I recommend having a look there or asking us questions, and we'll do our best to answer them. And then, obviously, you've come to this seminar, which is a great first step. But we have a Wiley stand here, and we have other publishers' stands, and conferences like this are really a great place to meet editors and publishers and run your ideas by them, and generally have a chat and get to know and understand what they're looking for. And if you can't speak to us in person, then there's always the social media forums and many journals will have their own social media accounts and be part of wider subject community accounts. So that's about it for the presentation part of this session. I will hand over to my editors and editorial office friends in a second. But there is if anyone would like a certificate, an email certificate for attending this session, then just leave your name on a card or email address down the bottom, and we can send that afterwards. So if that's useful, that's an option. So there we are. So should we start with Burge. Is that okay?
Yep. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Yeah, great. Okay. So my name is Dr. Karina Gervin. I'm on the editorial team for the British Educational Research Journal, along with my colleagues Mark Connolly, Sally Power and Chris Taylor. We're all based at Cardiff University. Burge is very much focused on presenting the best of British educational research to an international audience and the best of international research to a British audience. What does that mean? Well, we're looking for excellent research which is clearly communicated to people who are generally interested in educational research. We're a generalist journal, accepting articles which might involve mixed methods, qualitative, quantitative, longitudinal studies, range of disciplines, various different sectors. So very broad, and we have a very broad readership. And that's very important when it comes to writing an article for Burge, thinking about your readership. Okay, you might have a very specialist area that you work in, but making sure that it's accessible to that general readership is very important. Just to pick up a couple of points that Jess was mentioning about in terms of titles and keywords and abstracts. These are really, really important as editors, but also for you as authors and for the readers. Having a nice, clear title which really shows what your research is about is so important. I have the most recent edition of the journal here, and just to pick one out as an example, Do Learners Always Learn? The Impact of Workplace Adult Literacy Courses on Participants' Literacy Skills. Okay, nice and clear up front, that article. Okay, if I'm interested in that article, straight away I will go in and read it. Puns often get in the way, as one tip I would give. Again, thinking about keywords, making sure your article's searchable, and making sure that your article's going to be of interest when someone's just scanning over the abstract, making sure that it's very clear, clearly presents the ideas in your research, your methods, and gives some flavour for the findings and conclusions in that. I suppose one other thing I'll just say as well, just from relatively recent personal experience. It's not that long since I was sat where you were sat, and I got my first major corrections on an article, okay? And again, just to pick up something Jess was saying about, do read the comments, do consider them, work on them, and resubmit an article. When you first get that, reject or major revisions, it kind of feels like it's stabbing you in the heart, okay? You've put all your passion, your love, an enormous amount of time into writing your first article, and it can really feel personal, the comments that are made, okay? But you should know that reviewers make comments in order to enable you to improve your work, okay? They're on your side, okay? They want you to be able to produce the best work that you can, right? And again, as I said, Burge is very much orientated towards excellent research. Okay, so that's what they're pushing you towards, making sure it's nice and clear and easy for readers to access. Okay, so don't take them personally. Look at the review, then walk away from it, leave it for a couple of days, maybe share it with someone else, get a different perspective on it, and then come back at it and look at it again, be a little bit more critical, okay, thoughtful about it, and think, what is the reviewer actually asking me to do? Okay.
Thanks, Karina, that was great. So, we have Review of Education on the screen, and we're lucky that Sarah, who works in the editorial office, is joining us today, and she'll be able to answer any questions you might have. Review of Education is BERA's newest journal. It was launched in 2013, and I think primarily it takes the longer pieces, and 10,000 words and up, that's right. And then, Nick, do you want to get your presentation up?
You're not going to say anything, Sarah, just answer questions.
I can perhaps talk at the end about, I was thinking it might be useful to just say a little bit about editorial office and what my function is in the journals, but
okay,
go ahead.
Right. A very quick scamper through publishing in BJet. Let me say at the outset that there is so much that we could say about this that the amount of time that we've got available to us this morning just really does not fit. I'm at a conference for all 3 days. I'm in and out of sessions, but you can find me most of the time by just laying siege to the Wiley stand and saying, hey, I want to have a word. They've got my telephone number, they'll call me, and we'll make a time to meet. So, publishing in BJet. As you know, it's published by Wiley. Very international. Over the last 12 months, something like 50 different countries. And it's an over-the-horizon, I like to think of it as over-the-horizon radar. Okay? Maybe you can see a long way. It's got a title, the British Journal of Educational Technology. In actual fact, it's international. Something like 7 or 8% at the moment, it varies a bit, 7 or 8% of our submissions come from the United Kingdom. The others come from the other 49 countries. It varies. Some years there are 70 different countries represented. Last 12 months, 50. And it's also got articles in it, papers in it, of various aspects of training, not just education. So, for example, in November, we're publishing a special issue on technology-enhanced learning in the workplace. About 500 submissions each year. The acceptance rate is about 9%. The impact factor, well, it really depends whether you believe in impact factors. A lot of people think they're total rubbish. They can be manipulated, and trying to compare journals in different areas, impact factors aren't really very helpful. For example, 1.3 is quite a good impact factor for our field. In psychology, you'd be looking for 10 times that. Perhaps a better measure is that in the education and educational research category, we come out as 37 out of 200 and something. If you look at educational technology, we're in the top 3 in the world. That's perhaps a better measure. Jess talked about times to come to decisions about publishing. Well, our time to first decision, the first email that you get after you've submitted a paper, on average, is less than a month. So a final decision, on average, 2 months. We're very conscious about the fact that you want to get an answer quickly. Not only do you want to get into print quickly, but if we should happen to reject it, then you want to be able to submit it to somewhere else. Remember what Jessica was saying about don't parallel submit. Don't submit to more than one journal at a time. So we try and keep it really quick. I'm not going to read that out. You've got it actually on the bit of paper that you were given a few minutes ago. Basic requirements, rather shorter papers than the review of education. Our target length is about 4,000. We do accept papers longer than that, but there's got to be a very good reason. English language, given that we're a very international journal, that's a problem for some people. And it needs to be original. Plagiarism is a big problem. Please don't do it. We check every single submission to BJet, and it's one of the main causes for desk rejection. The paper that somebody has submitted is not sufficiently original. There are bits of it that should have been published elsewhere. Perhaps by the author, in some cases by other authors. It's academic misconduct, don't do it. Jessica was saying that the most red part of a paper is the abstract. We actually asked for something else. Yes, we want an abstract, but we also asked for a set of structured practitioner notes. There's no other point in having a paper published in a journal unless there is some result. We're publishing research in educational technology. We would like that to have some impact. And that's what the structured practitioner notes do. What's known about this subject? What does this paper add? And what should you, the reader, do about it? We also ask for an ethical statement. We also ask for a statement on open data. We're very keen that people's data sets should be available to other researchers by putting them in a repository. Sometimes it's not possible, but a statement about that. And also, perhaps it reflects the fact that sometimes in educational technology there are commercial, technological interests. We asked for a statement on conflict of interest. So there are one or two other things that we asked for. Everything is explained in our notes for authors. Now, as early career researchers, you have probably mastered the art of reading. Anybody here who can't read? Anybody who's prepared to admit they can't read? For heaven's sake, download the notes for authors and read them. Because that is the other most common reason for desk rejection. That people have not followed the notes for authors. We have a single blind review process. I'm very happy to talk through that in questions afterwards, but apart from that I won't bother, I won't waste time now. And that's where you get your information from. www.thebejet.com. If you want me, bjeteditor@wiley.com. Just one final thing. I'm sometimes asked what my aspirations are for BJet. And it's fairly simple. When you go to bed at night, you quite often do a little bit of reading. You pick up a crime novel or a romantic thriller or whatever it is. I would like BJet to be your bedtime reading of choice. And that has implications for the kinds of papers people submit. If you submit something which is boring, we're not likely to publish it. Okay, so if you want me, Wiley stand, telephone, I'll come and find you. Let's speak. Okay?
Okay, just to say a little word about the editorial office. I run the editorial office for 3 of BERA's journals. So Burge, Review of Education, and the Curriculum Journal. And my role is to be the interface, if you like, between you as authors and the editors. So I'm there at the end of the computer to assist you through the process. Now, they all operate an online submission system. It may seem daunting if you haven't used it before, but actually it's very straightforward and it walks you through the process very simply. But if there are any queries at any stage of the process, either during submission or following submission while you're waiting for a response, then you can always contact me. My link is in there. And I am the person that is the first port of call for those questions. I would second both Nick and Jessica in saying that please do have a look at the instructions for authors. All the journals are different. They have different requirements, they have a different intent, and if you just check first and make sure that you're following all of those rules, it will help you very significantly. For example, the word count, because Review of Education is an online-only journal that publishes large-scale papers. It's 10,000 words plus, whereas Burge papers, the maximum word count is 8,000. So that is the sort of point that, as Nick said, that's your first hurdle, if you like. You do need to pay attention to all of those points. But just the general message is we are approachable and we're here for any queries. Thank you.
So with that in mind, does anyone have any questions they'd like to raise with any of us, really? Please don't be shy. Yep.
So if you submit a paper and revisions are recommended, and you don't agree with, say, the revisions, is that just acceptable? Is there an opportunity to have some sort of dialogue?
Shall I repeat the question, first of all? Did everyone hear it? So the attendee was asking, if you submit a paper and you get feedback from reviewers that you don't agree with, do you have an option then, or is it just accept it?
The answer isn't. You negotiate. The editor's decision may be final, but it's not omniscient. Neither are the reviewers, in fact. We work very hard and all of us, to make sure that the reviewers are impartial, knowledgeable. We encourage them to give constructive feedback. But from time to time, the reviewers, if you like, go rogue on us. They've got their own viewpoint on something. And they produce a review which is not really very helpful. I don't think I've ever had a case of a reviewer rubbishing something because by doing so they would hope to stifle somebody else's research. But I have had reviewers who've torn something apart, really quite unjustifiably. If that happens, we encourage the author, if you're not going to follow the reviewer's suggestions, then explain why. Because we'll read that explanation. Explaining and saying, didn't feel like it, isn't really very helpful. But if you feel there's a good reason why you don't want to follow the reviewer's recommendations, okay, tell us about it. We do actually censure reviewers in private who produce reviews which we think are unjustifiably critical or political with a small p.
Let's see. Just to add to that, there are times when we'll get some, one reviewer might say reject, and the other one says minor corrections. Okay, so often just different viewpoints and stances on different topics might be part of that, and that's why we have more than one reviewer. Sometimes we might send it out to a third reviewer if we've got very polar opinions on an article. Again, second what Nick says, justify. The other thing is something I really feel that authors need to make more use of is actually a letter to the editors in response to reviewers' comments. Clearly outlining, not just if you've got a disagreement with something, but even if you've made a change, clearly outlining that you've made the change, where you've made the change. And maybe it has had a knock-on effect through the rest of your paper. And just outlining what that is and making it really clear and upfront what you've done. It's really, really valuable.
There can be examples as well where reviewers haven't spotted it, or they've worked on a review and they've not maybe taken hopefully they've taken an appropriate amount of time, but everyone's busy and everyone misses things, and in that case I would certainly recommend that you respond and say, actually in this paragraph I thought I covered that adequately, or whatever the question might be. Are there any other questions? Yep.
So I'm just curious if you could give me an idea of your turnaround times and your percentage rates the way Nick did, because that would be helpful for a lot of us to give us an idea of how many you're receiving on average per couple of months, and also.
Can I defer to Sarah, because I know she's got the numbers on her laptop.
I've got the numbers. So for Bird, we're quite a busy journal. We're looking at about 350 papers in a year, and the acceptance rate at the moment is about, let me just check, it's about 12 or 13%. Burge operates a two-stage review process as well, so to try and speed everything up. So all the papers are looked at by the editors to start with, and you might want to talk more about that, but
Yes, so we're looking at whether or not, as Nick was saying, does this fit the journal? Have they read the author's guidelines? Because reviewers are very, very busy people, okay, and they do the review work freely, okay. It's a great advantage for them to be able to see work early, get some ideas of the new things that are coming along. But they are very busy people, so we don't want to be sending something out to them which we know just doesn't fit the journal, and they will just immediately reject anyway. So that's a really important phase for us.
it also means we're not wasting the author's time. So if your paper isn't actually that suitable for the journal, then it's advantageous to you to know that quickly, and then you can choose to send it somewhere else.
And that turnaround is about how much? 2 months? 3 months?
What's that?
A year?
What's your
Oh,
time?
gosh,
What's your
no.
average time?
Well, yes, but
I don't know what our average is to first decision.
If the first decision is that it's not suitable to go out to review, then that is very quick. So that is
About a month or two?
less.
Yes, easily within
less than a month.
It
I
would,
mean,
it would
it's
certainly
really-
be within a month.
Yes, certainly. And then
Couple of
obviously,
weeks.
if it then goes out to review, then you should expect a couple of months probably for the turnaround.
If ours is a desk rejection, it's typically about 4 or 5 days. And I read everything that is submitted to the journal, and it's quite possible to make a decision. We do desk rejection for a number of criteria. Plagiarism, I've already spoken about. Perhaps the second most common reason is that this paper does not take us beyond what is already known. And there are an awful lot in educational technology, there are an awful lot of technology acceptance studies. We tried this bit of learning, with this bit of mobile learning, with a group of 25 university students, first-year university students. And you know what? They liked it. Well, the sample's too small, the results are too obvious, it tells us nothing new, it's not going any further. Out of scope, we've already covered. Length is one. If it's impossibly long, then we may actually suggest that they submit to review of education.
Yeah, length is something that actually the editorial office picks up on for Burge before it even gets to the editors. Because we have so many submissions, and we want to try and keep the process as efficient as possible, if we do get a paper that is 10,000 words, we know already that the editors and the reviewers will say it's too long, so I'll immediately feedback on that.
We may also, in BJET, do an initial desk request for some revisions. That could be because you haven't put the paper in the right format. It could be that there are things missing. Remember the practitioner notes, ethical statement, and things like that. It could be because it's too long, but I think it could be edited to make it shorter. I was looking at one on the train coming up today, which is over 6,000 words, and I could see immediately where you could take 1,500 words out of it, just with replicated bits of information. So we may just go back and do look, you need to revise it, and then send it back again.
I think I'd echo as well just that point on clarity, really, in writing, clear and concise. Because remember, eventually you want lots of people to read your article and to cite it in their works. If you make it as accessible to them as possible, they're much more likely to do that.
Any questions down at the front?
Just to go back to the idea of impact factor, I know that you already addressed it a little bit as well, but how to interpret the rankings and impact factor, and what to take into consideration as we maybe start with our very first applications?
So the question was how to interpret impact factor, the rankings, and what to look at specifically in terms of your first publications.
Should we be afraid of the very, very high rankings, or should we aim for these things?
Do you want me to be cynical about it?
Yes, please.
Impact factor is a very imperfect measure. It has the advantage that it is relatively easily calculated. I say relatively easily calculated because the calculation is not trivial, but it is relatively easily calculated. My cynicism is directed at two ends. Firstly, it is our masters, it's the universities who employ us. In the UK, it's the government, and in Australia, for example, it's the government who like to have a measure of how good we all are at carrying out research. And therefore they ask that we publish in index journals with a high impact factor. As I said, the actual impact factor really depends on the subject area. If I'm publishing in the area of oncology, cancer research, the impact factor is somewhere near the ceiling. And I wouldn't be looking at a journal that didn't have an impact factor of 20 or 30. If I'm publishing in psychology, I'd be looking at an impact factor of maybe 10, 15, 20 for a good journal. In education, in educational technology, because of the way that the factors are calculated, our impact factor is much lower. So you have to interpret it in the context of the subject area. The other problem I think we have is that impact factors can be manipulated. There are some journals that do that. There are some authors, we don't get... I tend to look askance at some of the authors who say, if you publish my paper, it will improve your impact factor, because I've cited a lot of papers from your journal. You cite papers that help the argument, not because it will help the impact factor. So it's possible to manipulate it. That said, I don't have a much better alternative. There's a lot of work on it going on now. Now, do you want to say something about altimetric?
Yeah, I can do a second, just to pick up on that first, I think, because Thomson Reuters, the people who manage the impact factor, you may well know, and they are looking more and more at their algorithm, and they are excluding journals which try and do that self-citation, and they're very clear now, and certain rates get you excluded. So they are trying to de-gamify it, but it is a difficult measure, and I think particularly within education, if you think about that 2-year impact factor window, that means that your research has to be published online, read by someone, cited by someone, and then that journal then has to be published all within those 2 years, which is a very fast turnaround. And so I think it's interesting to kind of look at journals and think, well, what's the 5-year impact factor? How is it measuring in that term? And I think it's kind of a great shame we don't look at that more, particularly within social sciences. And I'm speaking completely honestly, I would be pragmatic about it. Talk to people in your institution and how are they judging it? Is it more important to you that you have research every year, or is it more important that it's a higher impact factor? And I think that's the most helpful thing. It's how they're measuring you, and so you need to work with that, really. In terms of altmetrics, we have it. It's alternative metrics is what it stands for, and it's a software which sits now on the Wiley site and on many other publishers' sites, and it looks at measurements in terms of blogging, Twitter, and policy statements as well, and it just tries to pull in a rounder view of citations. So looking at where things are, quality citations, but not just within, because obviously the impact factor only includes citations within journals included in the impact factor in itself. So you're already looking at a smaller pool of journals. And altmetrics says, well, let's look wide in the journals, let's look at all these other social networks, and you get a score for each article, and you get a score for a journal with that. And that's a very new technology that's kind of a this year thing, but hopefully we're optimistic that other metrics like that will come up and allow us to look at journals in different ways, in different quantity. But that can be problematic in itself, because an altmetric score can go up and down considering how many people have saved that article within their Twitter account to read later and then stop reading it, and what are people doing with that article. But there are alternative metrics coming, I think.
I'll just say something on that as well, is that rather than always focusing on impact factor, look at the journals that other people in your area are using and reading, you know. Talk to colleagues, talk to supervisors, talk to other academics in your field. Which do they consider to be the best journals? Which ones do they subscribe to? What's their association with different groups? And that will give you an idea actually of the prestige of a particular journal.
Are there any other questions?
Everybody's going to publish with Taylor and Francis.
Please don't. Nice neutral session. But as we said, there are ways and means of contacting us. I will be at the Wiley stand today and tomorrow. And if you do want a certification or to leave your email address for whatever reason to get in touch, then please do leave it at the front or grab us afterwards. So thank you for attending, I guess.